This is Dr. Christopher Harris, and I'm going to give you a quick drive-through of teaching through games and how we approach games in an instructional setting for K-12 schools. So by day, I'm the director of the school library system for Genesee Valley BOCES.
Hey everybody, my name is Brian Mayer. It's a pleasure to meet and virtually all of you. I'm currently I work as a coordinator of the school library system and media services for Erie 2 BOCES. So I help make school libraries fantastic and wonderful.
I also do a consulting company called Play Learn, where we look at games and learning and technology for schools and libraries.
Prior to my position, I worked for about 12 years along with Christopher, my co-presenter, at the Genesee Valley BOCES school library system. One of the main sort of things that I did when I was there was I worked as a specialist, helping to kind of curate and build up a large collection of board games and modern style games that directly supported curricular application and use in the classroom.
The way that we've approached the selection and deployment of these games really is very different. We're not looking at surface alignment, just skimming along the top of saying, oh, it's critical thinking. Instead, we're diving deep into individual learning standards.
These were not educational games, but we looked for good games that allowed educators the opportunity to connect with and engage students with classroom curriculum and classroom skills.
How do we pick a game? Well, we remember it by just saying game. First, G, it's got to be a great game. It's got to be a great game. Kids see through these because they all play games. You can't have them flick a spinner and do the worksheet that comes up in some educational game. No, it's got to be a real game in order for this to work.
We then, as educators, look for how does it support the curriculum? Where are those connections made? How do they align to standards? And it needs to be aligned to standards. You cannot generally come in with soft skills, critical thinking, problem solving, and hope to kind of get educators and administrators to understand and buy into using a game in the classroom, because oftentimes there's stigma associated with a game as it being just a fun time or a rainy day activity or something more for pleasure and enrichment rather than something that directly allows students to explore and engage with curricular concepts and skills.
When we align games, we often are looking at them in two ways. We're looking at them in terms of the theme, what the game is about or what's portrayed in the game, as well as the mechanisms, how you actually play the game, what you're actually doing. Third, the M, that's where we modify the games. I know, horror. It's something that we really have to train teachers to think about, though, because they're so used to following the rules of the game. But sometimes we break the rules. Sometimes we change things up. There are lots of great games out there because we're usually buying commercial games off the shelf. And oftentimes those games have randomized elements in order to ensure replayability. But those aren't necessarily needed when we're using the game as an instructional tool. Remember, we're not playing the game, we're using it for teaching and learning. And so sometimes we take out those goals, those randomized play elements. Sometimes we'll do things to shorten a game. Sometimes we'll modify a game to use more players. So maybe it's really a two-player game, but we talk about having two teams of players, and we give each player on the team something that they're supposed to focus on within the gameplay.
And then what you need to do is kind of take a look at a return on investment and kind of evaluate what that looks like. And that takes into the idea, all of the things that we just talked about. How engaging of a game is it? How long does it take to play? And how much curriculum are they going to get out of it? So if you've got like a short game that just dips a little bit into curriculum, well, you can spend 15 minutes or 10 minutes and do a little sort of activity for them to kind of get their head around or into like being ready for going into a deep dive in a normal classroom environment, or you could have a robust game that goes across multiple days that is worth spending that time because the depth and the engagement with that curriculum is worth the time that you spend.
So, one thing I will say is when we go out and work with teachers, it's very important that we go out and work with teachers, especially when we're talking about larger games. We don't always just send the game out. Some very simple games, yeah, you can send the game out, but remember that that return on investment. If we're going to send a larger game out and really get a teacher to devote a couple of days to gameplay because we've modified it to fit into periods of instruction, we want to make sure it's successful. And so we go out as the experts who have played the game, who have really studied it and thought about it and thought about maybe designing some cheat sheets for students to think about, breaking down, well, yeah, when you see the rule book, it looks big, but really you're only making these couple of choices on each term. And so we go in as the experts to help the content area teachers. We go in as sort of the game experts to help with that learning and the play-based approach to learning.
If you're looking at getting into game design, there's different kind of levels that you can come in. So some of the ways that you can help ease them in is by introducing them to games and then having them sort of redesign a game or make a modification or a tweak to a game to get them sort of in the feeling. Or sometimes they can take an existing game and retheme it or come up with a new map and a new board. So that way they're not having to come up with mechanisms and things that work together. They're taking something that already exists and works and they're changing it and modifying it.
I can help explain sort of that amateur approach to game design, where I took a game and I saw a game that I loved, Haba's game, Secret Code 13+4. It's a math game, but I really enjoy the mechanism of what the game does. So I took a mechanism like that and I expanded it because I wanted a game for higher level students. And so I created this game, Asteroids 11, that is, inspired by Secret Code, and certainly pays homage to the mechanism of Secret Code, but lives on its own with an expansion of that mechanism of rolling dice and using the numbers and mathematical operations, and creates a whole new narrative type experience. And so that's the kind of game design that teachers can do, or that departments of education can do, or that libraries can do to really meet specific instructional goals.
As a side note, I am a game designer myself. I was very fortunate enough to have a game published, Freedom the Underground Railroad, which is a cooperative game about the abolitionist movement. That's really, the goal of the game was to try and engage players with the people, the events, the history around the abolitionist movement that oftentimes don't get discovered or learned about in school.
And what we really wanted to do was take these commercial games that we've selected and used in classrooms in the region here and really flesh out the ideas, really address the instructional standards, create lesson plans, unit plans, identify writing prompts, discussion questions, come up with primary source documents, readings that would support the learning. And so one of the first games that we tackled was Brian's game, Freedom the Underground Railroad. And so we were able to go back and pull out additional readings and historical documents and build a whole unit of learning, a whole unit of instruction that informed the teachers about the background, helped the students come to understand what they were doing and why they were playing the game the way they were playing it, helped them really understand everything that was going on behind the scenes in the game. And so I think that's why the phrase teaching through games is so different from just playing a game in a classroom. So that's the basics of really a quick drive-through of teaching through games and what we've done in terms of collecting games, selecting games, implementing these, going out, working with teachers to teach the games and help students use the games, and just really focusing on this whole concept of learning through gameplay, but in a very intentional way.
Look forward to our talk a little bit later, our chance to engage on the panel. Thanks very much for the time.